We're going to talk with Max Blumenthal, who's an award-winning reporter. In his new book, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel, author Max Blumenthal reports on contemporary Israeli society under the siege of increasingly authoritarian politics as the occupation of the Palestinians deepens and the annexation of Palestinian lands continue. In Goliath, Blumenthal spent the last 4 years immersing himself in every aspect of Israeli life with a heavy focus on hardline political leaders and movements. He reveals an Israel where right-wing leaders are sacrificing democracy on the altar of power politics. And Max Blumenthal, welcome to WMNF. Great to meet you.
Great to be on with you, Rob.
Thanks for coming by. I want to ask you, first of all, it's often said that Israel is the only democracy in that part of the Middle East. I think here we think of democracies as letting everybody vote and being multicultural. On the score of democracy, how does Israel rate?
Well, if you call Israel a democracy, you besmirch the very concept of democracy. Israel has separate citizenship rights for people based on their ethnicity within the area that it directly controls, and then it disenfranchises millions in the occupied territories, millions of Palestinians who it's held under military control for over 50 years in the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank. Then there are the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in East Jerusalem who live under Israeli occupation, who cannot hold citizenship rights and hold Jordanian residency. There's no such thing as Israeli nationality, which is incredibly unusual for a country that calls itself a democracy. You receive your nationality based on your ethnicity. So your ID form will declare you either Jewish or Arab. And if you are Arab, even if you're a citizen of Israel, you have far less citizenship rights. And that's really something I illustrate in my book, just by telling the stories of everyday people, especially Palestinian citizens of Israel and leaders of Palestinian society in Israel, and the kind of plight that they've suffered inside the Jewish state. So this kind of logic is really the basis of institutional discrimination, and it's not something that I would define as democracy. I would probably use a term like ethnocracy to describe what Israel is.
Give us an example of how Arab Israelis are treated as second-class citizens.
Well, if I lived in what could be described as the Palestinian ghetto of Tel Aviv, which is Jaffa, which used to be a thriving Arab city before the foundation of the State of Israel. Most of its residents were forcibly expelled, actually literally thrown into the sea and forced to flee to Lebanon and Gaza on boats. Those who remained have kind of reconstituted after a long period of military occupation. And this is 5 minutes south of Tel Aviv. There are 500 standing eviction orders for Palestinians in Jaffa because it's almost impossible for them to get building permits to even renovate their kitchen. Imagine if renovating your kitchen was illegal because of your ethnicity, because you couldn't get a building permit because 40% of your home is owned by the state. So they are facing mass eviction, which is all part of a plan to drive them out.
Frequently you hear people say there are Arab Israelis who are elected to the Knesset, and therefore everybody in Israel has full democratic rights.
Yeah, there is an effort to, at the same time, deploy Palestinian citizens of Israel who serve in the Knesset for propaganda purposes by the Israeli government. When Netanyahu comes to Congress in Washington, he'll talk about all of the Arabs who serve in the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. But at the same time, there's an effort by his party to actually strip them of their right to run for Knesset. And the Central Elections Committee in the last 2 elections has actually banned a Palestinian woman named Hanin Zouabi from running for Knesset simply because she advocates for Israel as a state of all its citizens. In other words, a state with no religious or racial preferences. And the Supreme Court has to overturn that decision each time. There's a new effort by Netanyahu's Likud party to raise the electoral threshold. This is a parliamentary system, so that you have to hold 4 seats in order to get into the Knesset, and most Arab parties, in fact all of them, have less than 4 seats. It's an effort to remove Arab parties completely. There's never been an Arab party that served in a governing coalition, and they are explicitly prevented by figures like Yair Lapid, who's considered a centrist in Israel, who's a key partner in Netanyahu's governing coalition, and he was offered the chance to to prevent the extreme right wing from forming a coalition, but he would have had to have gone into a coalition with a few Arab parties, and he said, I will not work with any Arab party in government. So they basically are serving as kind of cover on what Israel really is, which is an ethnocracy, these Arab parties, but they have very little ability to influence the key national security decisions, and that's because Jewish Israeli society doesn't want them to and does see them as an internal threat.
We're talking with Max Blumenthal. He'll be speaking tonight at the University of South Florida in Tampa at the Marshall Center at 5 o'clock. He's written a new book called Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. Max, let me ask you about growing up. When you were growing up, what were your thoughts about Israel? What did you think about Israel? You were born in the late 1970s, right?
Yeah, and I grew up like in a very normal American environment. Grew up in Washington, D.C. mostly, which was a mostly black city, and multiculturalism and liberalism were part of my upbringing. But as an American Jew, Zionism calls on you. Zionism is Jewish nationalism, the obligation to support Israel, the Jewish state. I went to Hebrew school. There was an Israeli flag next to an American flag on the platform that the rabbi spoke from, next to a United Nations flag, which was draped in black in protest of the UN's now nullified resolution in the late 70s declaring Zionism a form of racism. So I always had these questions in my mind. The seeds of curiosity were there from the beginning. By age 22, I went on a free trip for American Jews called the Birthright Israel trip. Birthright Israel. And we were prevented from speaking to Palestinians, from seeing how they live. The trip was basically a big party to encourage, Jews to marry each other and date each other and prevent assimilation in the U.S. But there was also indoctrination. And so I became increasingly curious, and as I entered a career in journalism and media, I started following this issue really closely until I came to the conclusions that I arrived at and actually decided to embark on this project, which led to the publication of my book, Goliath, Life and Loathing in Greater Israel. So after I finished my first book, Republican Gomorrah, which is about the Christian right and the Tea Party takeover of the Republican Party.
Which was a New York Times bestseller.
Which was a bestseller and got me lots of mainstream attention, which this current book, Goliath, hasn't received. I decided to invest my royalties and my advance money into an extended research and reporting project inside Israel-Palestine. In 2009, right after Israel elected the most right-wing government in its history, so I spent almost a year on the ground there and 4 or 5 years researching and reporting on this issue and compiled it into this book, Goliath.
You're kind of famous for the videos you make, and I want to go back to 2009, in which you, in Israel, in Jerusalem, encountered a group of American young people, and I gather by looking at them, mainly in their late teens and early 20s, who were making one of these birthright trips to Israel. And I want to play some of the audio from that, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's okay with me.
All right,
this
well,
video's been banned from YouTube. So
okay, let's listen to this is Max Blumenthal, our guest, interviewing young Americans on the streets of Jerusalem in 2009.
What do you think, by the way, about Obama coming to the region? He's a dead. Yeah, I don't know politics, but he's a dead. And you don't want to take away my gun rights as a phone deserves to get shot.
Israel first. Netanyahu told him to off, and that's how we do it here in Israel, baby.
Himself. What you saying?
If he's pressuring him and pressuring Israel, then go himself.
I worked for the Obama campaign, but honestly, you in Israel, you mother. Stop it. All right, white power, the niggers.
He does care about Jews and he does care about the Arabs. The thing is, he doesn't understand that this country is Arabs.
I think it's really up that he's going to all the Arab states and not Israel. Oh, he's a Muslim for sure. And who even knows if he was born in the United States? We haven't seen his birth certificate yet. He's not from the U.S. He's like a terrorist. Just, what is he doing for this country so far? Nothing.
What do you?
Political science major, so like.
So you know your.
I know my.
Do you know who Ben Benjamin Netanyahu is?
No. 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 Is he the Israel prime minister or something? I don't know who he is. Who's Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, that's Max Blumenthal, part of an interview he did with American students on the streets of Jerusalem in 2009. Put that more in context. What was going on there, and is that typical of Americans who make the Birthright Tour trip to Israel?
Many of those Americans were also studying in yeshivot, or like Jewish institutions of learning in Jerusalem, and they're in an area that's notorious for debauchery and just lewd behavior by American Jews in Jerusalem, which is, and it's also an area in my book where I describe mob attacks on young Palestinians, because there are Palestinians who live just 15 minutes away in occupied East Jerusalem. So there is with this video, I was trying to send a message of warning to Americans, not only about, the kind of obscene, bellicose, and racist attitudes that are pouring out into the streets of Jerusalem towards Arabs, but also the kind of hatred that met the election of Barack Obama, and the kind of reception he could have expected if he applied any pressure on Israel. So this took place the night before his historic address to the Arab world in Cairo, and I just was assigned by a website called Mondoweiss with going out and doing man-on-the-street interviews, and I was taken into this warren of seedy bars and met all these American Jews from Long Island who were competing with one another for who could make the most racist comment about Obama, and it did reflect something very real at the time. Barack Obama has reneged on all his promises that he made at Cairo, for example, to respect and honor Palestinian nonviolence, and to respect the Palestinian drive for statehood. His administration has obstructed all Palestinian ambitions to statehood and presented them with this complete sham of a framework agreement and negotiations. But at the same time, the hatred for Barack Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, has been unrelenting in Israel, and we have heard attacks on the administration, not just from common people in the streets who are heavily indoctrinated, but also by the Israeli defense minister, Moshe Ya'alon, who just had to apologize today for his personal attacks on Secretary of State John Kerry. So we see this unshakable bond as really kind of a joke in the Obama era. I should mention that 2 weeks ago, the Israeli Democracy Institute, which is the most prominent and reputable polling outfit in Israel, took a poll of Israelis on the special relationship with the U.S., and a majority of Jewish Israelis declared that their wish to find new allies in the Obama era, although 70% also declared that they don't believe they'll find those allies. So Israel is increasingly resembling this kind of paranoid garrison state in the Obama era, and what was reflected in this video is something very real.
Well, I remember the day. I'm about 20 years older than you are. I remember the day when students that I went to college with would go to Israel and work on a kibbutz. And Israel was viewed as kind of like people thought it was a socialist paradise that also embraced democracy. And how would you describe what the nature of the Israeli government is today?
Well, it's completely different. I mean, the kibbutz is being sustained for purely sentimental reasons, and most of the government's money is going into the settlements. I should mention that the kibbutzim were established on Palestinian land, and many of the original founders of the kibbutzim, the kibbutz movement, physically removed Arabs with their hands and with weapons, whereas settlers, well, as violent as they are or can be, and as bellicose as they can be, haven't generally done that. But the settlement industry enterprise does really represent the nail in the coffin of a Palestinian state and the consolidation of this messianic vision of Greater Israel. And so it attracts Americans of a kind of different political stripe. And those who came over to Israel and were very idealistic from the American Jewish community are increasingly sympathetic to the kind of things that I'm saying right now on your radio show. And many of them have hosted me on this research and reporting venture that I made, and were guides for me. They they're disgusted by what's happening in their country as they see it kind of handed over to religious nationalist settlers. And so in the U.S., what we're seeing is a trend of republicanization of pro-Israel support, not just within the American Jewish community, which has very few Republicans, but in the evangelical community. There was recently a poll conducted by the Pew polling agency of American Jewish attitudes on Israel, and only 12% of secular American Jews, like me, declared Israel to be the promised land, or a land that was given to the Jews by God, whereas 83% of evangelical Christians said that it was. And these are the people that are volunteering to go to the settlements and pick grapes. These are the people that are responsible for the largest tourist event in Jerusalem every year, the Feast of the Tabernacles, and they are not Jewish, although, you know, when I meet them, they talk to me as if they are Jewish, and they wear Jewish religious garb, and they blow shofars, and they're emulating a form of Judaism that's completely foreign to me, and the Israeli government is there to welcome them with open arms.
Do you think that the conservative Christians who were there eventually want to convert the Jewish population of Israel?
Absolutely. They're heavily involved in mass conversion of Jews. The Christian embassy in Jerusalem, which occupies actually a Palestinian home whose residents were expelled in Kadamon in South Jerusalem, is heavily involved in efforts to convert Jews. And the Israeli government overlooks this because they are determined to cultivate Christian Zionist support, not just in the U.S., but in Europe and in the developing world, where Christian Zionism and Pentecostal Christianity is growing rapidly as Catholics actually move into the evangelical fray.
Max Blumenthal is our guest. He's written a new book about Israel called Goliath. Our phone number 813-239-9663. He's speaking tonight at the University of South Florida in Tampa at the Marshall Center. Max, I want to play a little bit more of a video. This one about speeches made on the streets of Israel attacking immigrants from Africa.
Right.
And I want to ask you about this. You want to set up, because I started pretty much at the beginning, and I want to hear about a minute and a half of it, but what are we about to listen to?
There are 60,000 non-Jewish African refugees in Israel, mostly from Sudan, fleeing genocide, and they're seeking refugee rights and asylum. There's no path to asylum for them in Israel because they're deemed a demographic threat. They're not Jewish, therefore they're a threat to the Jewish character of the state. The state has ventured to deport all of them and pass laws allowing their indefinite detention, and they are being victimized by race riots and racist incitement by top-level Israeli politicians in Netanyahu's party.
Let's listen to a little bit of Max's video talking about that situation.
2006, about 60,000 Africans have arrived in Israel on harrowing treks through the Sinai Desert, fleeing poverty, persecution, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. As refugee camps across Africa fill up and Europe closes its gates to asylum seekers, Israel became the next best option, accessible by land and said to be a developed democracy. But instead of providing them with safe haven, Israel is both refusing to grant them any benefits and denying them the ability to work legally to support themselves. Faced with poverty and exploitation, a new nightmare unfolded.